and welcome to today's segment of The Power of Money. I'm your host, Michelle Graves, nationally and internationally known as the Money Lady, and I am delighted to be here today to help you, my viewers, to learn and grow in areas that you may have never considered. So, again, knowledge is power, and it enables you to make good, sound financial decisions. So it is with great delight that I bring you today's show. I have an extraordinary show, so just sit down, get on your cell phones, tweet, Facebook, let everyone know they need to watch this show because we're in a historic moment. I am going to be talking about, with my esteemed panel of guests today, the whole issue of long-term care. Now, before you say, what does that have to do with me? I'm here to tell you it has everything to do with you. Whether you like it or not, you are going to be impacted in the days ahead by a country that is confronting an rapidly aging citizenry. 10,000 people a day, known as baby boomers, are retiring and leaving the workforce. But they're not leaving without agendas and potential problems because aging is what it is. Things begin to break down, things to begin to happen. So on today's show, I have brought to you, my viewers from throughout the United States, an esteemed group of people that are experts on this very, very difficult and challenging subject, long-term care. I have today as my guest Ray Copenhaver, who is a long-term care product specialist and a senior himself. I have with me Nancy Roberson, who is an attorney at law and specializes in estate planning and elder issues. She's a sharp lady. I have with me Carrie Mueller from the Alzheimer Association of Dayton, Ohio. And again, she is very, very seasoned in that challenging issue, Alzheimer's disease. And finally, I have Doug McGarry, who is the executive director of the Agency on Aging for Dayton and Miami and Montgomery County. And we'll be talking with them from their own perspectives as people that are dealing with this every day as a part of what they do. And we're going to see what they have to say. I always believe that if you want answers, you need to go to the very best in the industry and get their perspective and engage in the necessary dialogue that we must, as a nation, deal with. And we do know that all of us are dealing with financially challenging times. That is understood. But there's some things that we really do have to deal with. And one of those things is that big fat elephant in the living room called you're getting older, or mom and dad are getting older, or Gramps is getting older and they're doing things. And what am I going to do? Okay, so we're going to open up today's show, and I'm going to start with Mr. Copenhaver, and if he would introduce himself to the viewers and just share a little bit about his background and his perspective about this crisis. And I do call it a crisis because it is. And then we'll just go from him to the rest of our guests. Would you begin, Mr. Copenhaver?
Good morning, and thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
And it's a pleasure to be be here today. I'm Ray Copenhaver, and a resident of Ohio for almost 50 years. And I work in the long-term care insurance field, which means we help folks and businesses to do planning with an insurance product that many people are not aware of. It's a product that helps us out as we age, and possibly where we might need some attention or some care. And it's a issue that can happen where it's a large expense that's involved with that type of care. So I'm proud to be able to work with the community and with people in Ohio. We do the insurance from a planning standpoint, and we also serve the state of Ohio by communicating about the Ohio Partnership Plan. And I'm sure we'll talk about more about that this morning.
Yes. Our next guest.
I'm Nancy Roberson. I'm a lawyer in private practice in Kettering, Ohio. I've had my own business for about 26 years. I've been a certified specialist in the areas of estate planning, trust, and probate law since 2003. And my practice focuses on assisting people with planning for death and disability, and then also administering estates after people die. And we really have a twofold focus on planning for aging, and one of the areas involves making sure that the legal documents are in order, that people have the appropriate legal documents. But then in addition, we also talk about financing the long-term care, and of course that's where Ray comes in too, working with professionals like Ray to network with people and get them linked up with the financing solutions that they need as well. We start early with our clients. Legal age in Ohio is 18. We plant seeds at that time, and I say with a smile, you know, you're not thinking about this at all right now, but I want you to hear about the term long-term care insurance, and that sometime in your life you should consider getting that. And so that's the type of planning that we do.
Excellent. And Ms. Mueller?
Well, I'm Carrie Mueller, and I'm with the Alzheimer's Association Miami Valley chapter. And really I'm here to talk about how Alzheimer's is impacting all of the, in particular this group of baby boomers, with age being the highest risk factor for getting Alzheimer's. You know, we have 5.4 million Americans in our country right now, and that's expecting to triple in the next by 2050. So what those implications are, and most importantly for us, how can we help families who are currently impacted by Alzheimer's? And to be able to talk about what the services are that we can provide and the ways that we can help families who are currently dealing with Alzheimer's, in addition to, of course, hopefully working towards that vision of a world without Alzheimer's that we do.
Mr. McGarry?
I'm Doug McGarry. I'm Executive Director of the Area Agency on Aging in Dayton, but we serve a 9-county region in West Central Ohio. And as an area agency, we're one of nearly 700 organizations across the country who really serve to plan and coordinate services for older adults and their families, and develop really a comprehensive service to older adults, providing information and options to them.
Excellent. Well, as you can see, viewers, this is an amazing group. And I'm going to just put questions out, and I'm just going to ask you to chirp in, chime in with your thoughts. And let's begin with question number 1, which is, how serious is the issue of aging and long-term care?
Michelle, I'll start off.
Okay.
It's a serious question. As a country, we're not getting any younger. We're getting older, number 1. And oftentimes what we're seeing is many breakthroughs in healthcare that allow us to live longer. But as we live longer, we are experiencing more disabilities that do not permit us to do the basic activities of daily living. We can't climb the stairs. We may get confused. And at that point in time, we may need help in living independently.
Anybody else? Just chime in.
One thought I'd like to mention is many times we feel that long-term care or need of a nursing home always happens to the other person. We don't foresee that this could impact us or maybe impact our family, but it does. And when it does impact your family, it impacts more than the person who needs that help. As Doug said, activities of daily living. When that person needs help with just basic things like bathing and grooming and dressing, they usually get that help from a person called a caregiver. And that caregiver may very well be their spouse or some other member of the family, and it impacts the caregiver very severely, especially if they're still in the job where they're still working. Okay. And they have that responsibility, or possibly they are still possibly raising children. So it's a situation that can approach a family, and it can approach the family quickly. It doesn't always take a period of time to develop. It can happen rather quickly. We are aging, and people are living a lot longer in America than years ago.
Well, and I think in terms of Alzheimer's, you know, so often they do require 24/7 care at a certain point in the progression of the disease. And many people try to provide that care at home, whether it be a paid caregiver or someone from the family. But we know that the toll that 24/7 care takes on caregivers, and so often their health is also impacted by providing this 24/7 care. And so, of course, the impact on long-term care is many people in the later stages of Alzheimer's end up in a long-term care facility. And when we talk about this number that I talked about tripling, so then we have all these individuals who could be diagnosed with Alzheimer's and providing that long-term care to them. The other thing is the financial implications. We know that someone who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's in a long-term care facility costs 19 times more to care for than someone who does not have Alzheimer's. So you can see that financial implication on long-term care as well. You know, it all kind of multiplies. So.
What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts as a lawyer are that, you know, remember when we first watched, those of us who are old enough to remember, we saw the first Star Trek, Space, the Final Frontier. No, space is not the final frontier. Death and aging and disability, they are the final frontier. And people are afraid to plan for them, and so they postpone planning, thinking that there will always be time to plan. And as others have said, there are issues that cannot come on quickly that can interfere with the opportunity to do prudent legal planning. And then sometimes we're stuck with legal resources we don't want. Guardianships through the probate court as opposed to a more informal arrangement with a power of attorney. So the sooner that we can plan while we are still healthy, and dealing with the realities of life, the better off we are and our families are.
So from what I'm hearing there, is it fair to say that we are in a place of denial right now? Would you say America is in denial regarding the aging crisis?
Many people are. Many people are. I do meet with some people who are, they've heard a professional like yourself. They've done some reading. They've developed a personal conviction that it's time to plan. But compared with planning vacations or the daughter's wedding or the 25th wedding anniversary celebration,
It's more fun.
It's right. It's not fun.
It is more fun
yes.
than sitting up thinking about dying and sickness and the way that society portrays aging.
Well, let's face it, some of the planning costs money too. Right. And legal documents cost money, long-term care insurance costs money. I've had people sit across the table, because we sit at a conference table generally when we meet, and when I learn that they don't have long-term care insurance and tell them it's important, why it's important, there's so many misconceptions. As Ray's the expert here, people think the government's going to pay for long-term care or that their private health insurance is going to pay for long-term care. And when I tell them, no, that's not the case, you need to look into getting long-term care insurance.
Or I think there's the misconception that Medicare covers long-term care.
That's
I mean, that's a huge
Okay.
misconception.
You want to
Doug
speak to
can
that,
probably
Doug?
speak more to that. But.
Well, it's understandable that people don't understand it, because oftentimes if you look at your Medicare policy or even a private insurance policy, it will include a nursing home benefit, it will include a home care benefit. What no one bothers to explain to people is they will pay for what is known as nursing home health care benefit, home care benefit, but it is a health care benefit, not long-term care.
Right.
What's the difference? Well, huge difference in terms of what Medicare will pay for. Medicare will only pay for the care that is supervised by a physician. It is a highly technical skill. Long-term care is not considered true health care because it's not necessarily delivered by a professional, so to speak, but by your caregivers. And it's not about health care, it's about assistance in daily living. So it's not covered. And that's, unfortunately, so many people find out after 20 days in a nursing home or a short-term home health care benefit that their coverage has run out. And the cost of a stay in a nursing home, we're talking, $60,000 a year. People can't afford it, and their life savings can disappear very quickly.
You want to speak to that, Ray?
Well, I think what Doug is sharing with us is that our responsibility as professionals is to help the public know that there is a difference between chronic care and health care, or what we might call acute care. Long-term care is a very personal. It's very personal help that you need after the doctor is no longer involved. For example, the doctor in the hospital and nursing may have reached a point where they have us comfortable. They have the main healthcare issue resolved, but we're now needing what we might call maintenance. We need someone to maybe help us get out of bed. We call that transferring. And don't we all take that for granted? When we wake up in the morning, we're sure that we'll be able to leave the bed ourselves. But many times a chronic condition that might be with us for the rest of our life prevents us from getting out of bed without help. The two that we often see of personal needs are the bathing and dressing, or even help to do your toileting. Well, those are what are called chronic issues, and they're very personal. And it's attention that we need to those things every day. Medicare is a health insurance type policy. So those of us over 65 who are blessed to be on Medicare, we cannot take for granted that Medicare will pay for the chronic needs, because it's not structured to do that.
I agree. Yeah. That's very good information. So as we look at, we take a broad look at all of the things that are coming down the pike and the day-to-day encounters we're finding. Let's start with you, Mr. McGarry. What is your most frequent encounter today? Because you all cover such a broad perspective and spectrum of services. Where are you seeing most of your inquiries?
Most of the inquiries are individuals who all of a sudden there is a health care crisis and they are looking for options. The best example is mom or dad got rushed to the hospital, had a stroke, need ongoing assistance. What are our options? What do we do? And that's when they all of a sudden realize that the Medicare benefit is not long-term. What options do we have? Where do we go? How do we get help? We get, I would say, roughly about 1,400 phone calls in any given month.
1,400 phone calls a month.
A month. And what shocks us the most is 70% of those phone calls are first-time callers. And it doesn't change. Every month there's a new 1,400 people calling, which talks to you about what is the growing demand and people wanting options, people wanting help.
And what about you with Alzheimer?
Well, and I think that you'll hear this, all of us will have the same message of our challenge with people calling in is they wait too long. You know, everything that, what we know right now about Alzheimer's, there is no way to treat it, slow the progression, or prevent it right now. So we know early detection matters. We know that people need to pay attention to what are the warning signs of Alzheimer's, because we know if we can connect with people earlier, we can help them live better lives with the right information, education, and support. And all of us provide some of those things, and we refer people to all of these people here. So we know wonderful. That we can better help families, but families wait too long. And so when they're farther down in the progression, they don't have as much time to plan legally. They don't have as much time to plan for long-term care. So the earlier that families can be aware of dementia, Alzheimer's signs, the earlier they can connect with us so we can help them make a plan and connect them with all these people that can help them with their future, the better off these families are. Our challenge is people wait too long. They wait too long to go to the doctor about a concern they've had. They wait too long to ask for help until many times it is hospitalization or a loved one who drives and gets lost and can't find their way home. And it's these big, I mean, we had a family just last week that happened to. The loved one was missing. They'd gotten in the car, they'd driven, and then they got lost. They didn't know how to get back home. And it took it to go that far before the family member said, you know what, I think we really need to get some help here. I think it's worse than we thought it was. Don't wait. I mean, that's definitely our message. The earlier we can be involved, the better we can help families to plan.
And what about you, Ray? Just anecdotally.
I think the urgency of planning goes back to one of your opening statements of the elephant in the room. And we all realize that this could happen. We all realize that mom and dad or our spouse may need some care that would go beyond the doctor care. But it's like many other things, we'll plan for that tomorrow. We'll think about that next week. What's interesting in America today is it's difficult to go through any day without reading your daily paper or one of the other periodicals and not see some alert or some announcement in there of people needing help, people needing care, and not having a way to pay for it. Medicare is a health-driven model, so we hear almost every day, but we read that and I guess we think it's the other family that will be impacted. We don't think our family will be impacted.
That's right.
What I'm pleased to do is to have an opportunity to work with families and to work with folks that would like to take that step and do planning so that when age arrives or a chronic condition arrives, then they have options, they have choices. So maybe I want to stay home, but it might be expensive to bring home care in, but if I did a plan, I would be able to pay for that type of care. And the family's really blessed when that happens.
I'm sure they are.
Yes.
What from your perspective, what are you seeing?
I have seen too many, I have received too many telephone calls from people, primarily children of parents who've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or the parent has had a stroke, there's Parkinson's, other types of debilitating illnesses, where there has not been adequate legal or financial planning. And then we move into crisis mode. What can we still do? Many of the calls inquire, how can we prevent mom and dad's money from being spent on the nursing home? And unfortunately, it's often couched in terms of, we really want mom to get the best care, but if it would be possible, we would like to protect our inheritance too. And because many baby boomers and others have not planned properly for retirement, so they're counting on an inheritance as their retirement plan. So there's that panic factor that's involved too in the planning. But as a lawyer, certainly a major concern is if the person does not have the proper legal documents, does he or she still have the mental competency to sign documents? And that's where waiting too late can come in.
So may I ask what happens if they don't have the mental competency?
Well, if financial or health care decisions need to be made for a person who is determined, and generally that determination is made by the physician, to not have the appropriate mental capacity. In legal terms, it's know the nature and extent of your bounty and know what you have, for example. Then we have to go to court and someone has to be appointed as that person's legal guardian. And Guardianships can be expensive, time-consuming, demeaning, combative if family members don't agree on who should be in charge.
Don't all family members agree, Nancy?
Oh my goodness. Oh.
Oh, maybe not.
No, no. On a good day, maybe we get some consensus.
Yeah.
But and then unfortunately, sometimes the decisions need to be made very quickly, or the utilities are going to be shut off if the bills aren't going to be paid. And the person calling wants access to the money right away. Mm-hmm. Well, if we have to go a guardianship route, we're looking at 6 weeks, maybe, if we're lucky, to get a guardianship established. So those are some of the challenges that we faced when proper planning has not been done.
I think, and I'm just sharing what I hear a lot, an overriding issue is the issue of the money. It's back to the money.
Yes.
If you talk about purchasing a long-term care policy, I've heard that as an obstacle, the money. Do you want to speak to that, Ray?
The cost of long-term care insurance has moved up over the past few years. And many folks feel that it is a product with a price tag that it would be beyond their capability. We feel that maybe the folks are misinformed. Maybe they have not spent some time with a professional who might be able to show them options that are very affordable. For example, our state of Ohio has a plan now called Partnership Plan, which will allow an individual or a man and wife as a couple to purchase a insurance plan at what we would consider to be very reasonable premium cost, and that plan will do two very powerful things. One, it will give them choices so that maybe they can stay home to receive their care rather than going to a facility. And the home care might be just as costly as the facility, but all of us would rather stay at home. But because we have the partnership plan, the state of Ohio is willing to protect the amount of dollar assets that are paid out by the insurance company. So this means the person could purchase a more affordable plan for a smaller amount of benefits, knowing that they have protected a certain amount of their savings, and then should they live beyond that amount that the insurance pays, the state of Ohio then would allow Medicaid to pay for their care, and they would be protected to keep that amount of savings. So it makes the plans much more affordable and attainable, and at the same time allows the family to see that they can protect their assets.
I think that's powerful, because the reality is if an individual goes on Medicaid, as I understand the law, they're only allowed to have $1,500 in aggregate assets. And that is something people don't understand. That everybody has long-term care in America called Medicaid, but you have to be indigent, poor, to tap in the benefit. The government's not going to pay for your mother if she has assets. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
So as I'm hearing you with this Ohio partnership plan, and there are other states that offer that as well. I think, does Indiana offer?
Yes.
They do a partnership as well. What about Kentucky? Does
Kentucky does
Kentucky?
as well.
So this is a pretty widespread plan, would you not say?
42 states have it.
42 states, that's impressive. So what it says is that if you have a long-term care plan under the partnership program administered by your state, then that portion of premium paid, is that how that reads? Money paid out.
The benefits
The
paid
benefits paid out. That portion would be insulated from asset seizure.
Yes.
So then the family should buy that plan just to protect their inheritance. Am I not correct here? Am I just not getting it? Am I getting it?
You're correct.
You're
Bing,
correct.
I'm getting it.
Yes.
Okay.
And Michelle, you know, I've suggested to children at times, why don't you pay for your parents' long-term care insurance? And
Yes. Sounds good to me.
And some children have bought into that because, after all, they're looking after protecting their inheritance.
Well,
And they're
it's a
on
form of
board with that.
insurance.
Yes, it's a
It would
form of
seem to
insurance.
me,
Yes.
If you're concerned about getting inheritance and your parents are in need of custodial care at 60 to 90 grand a month.
A year.
A year. A year. Oh, a year. I was going to say, you're going to be broke. But that's still extreme.
Yes.
Particularly
yes,
if the length of care is 5-7 years. That's a lot of money.
Right.
Most people don't
and
have
Michelle,
it. Yeah.
you said something else, and a lot of people don't realize it. You made the distinction between Medicare and Medicaid.
Talk about that.
Well, huge differences, but oftentimes people use the terms interchangeably.
Right.
Frustrates the heck out of me.
Or they use the term Medicare, Medicaid.
Right,
Like it's
together.
the same thing.
Right.
Medicare is a health insurance program for older and disabled folks. And Medicaid is an entitlement program for low-income individuals of all ages that pays for your health and long-term care when you have no more money left or assets. And so, big difference between the two. And the most painful process for many folks is that slow or rapid, depending upon the situation, where you go from paying using your regular insurance, paying privately, and then realizing all the money is gone, and then you switch to Medicaid.
Whoa, whoa.
And then let's talk about the challenges of married couples.
Well,
Yes.
let's talk
And I'm
about
going to
that.
let Nancy address it, but then you have one who's, you know, especially with Alzheimer's, for example, you might have the person with Alzheimer's who's declined and they might need long-term care, but you have the spouse at home who still is living independently and needs to, and their finances are connected.
Right, they are. Because in terms of Medicaid qualification, the finances of the married couple are considered together, not independently. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the couple's resources have to be spent to pay for the nursing home care. That's one of the, you know, there's so much ignorance surrounding this subject, and that's why I applaud you for having this program today, because people need to know. But a major fear of the community spouse is that she's going to have to sell her house to pay for her husband's nursing home care. Well, no, the government is not interested in putting her out on the street to pay for his care. Her home is going to be a protected asset, as well as some of the couple's investments. But there is a cap on what they can keep. They can't, you know, and they can't just move everything into her name and then she think,
Voila.
oh, yeah. It doesn't work that way. The couple's resources count together and are figured in terms of the Medicaid qualification.
I think that's very, very on time, because there is a huge, huge gap in the understanding of Medicaid.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I wrote an article in Cincinnati on Medicaid for seniors and got lots of requests because there was a complete absence of understanding that it is a program for the poor.
Yes.
And you cannot maneuver, as some people say, well, I'm just going to transfer the home into my daughter's name. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, yes.
I'm going to move that, I'm going to
Yes.
move that other piece of investment property into my children's name. And I'm like, excuse me, are you serious? You're going to do fraud? I mean, federal fraud? But they don't know. And again,
Right.
I think it's what you said, panic sets in, and they don't quite know how to deal with that. What has your experience been, Ray?
Well, we all think that we know how things like Medicaid work. And many times we think we have a handle on that because that's what our neighbor told us. Well, the problem is the neighbor heard that from another neighbor. And not a
Right,
real solid
right.
source.
Right.
I like what Doug was saying. We need to help people break out what is Medicare and what is Medicaid. Medicare, those seniors like myself, that's not free. I pay for that. There's a certain amount of premiums and costs that both my wife and I need to pay, and we understand that because it provides health coverage. And most of us who are over 65 who have Medicare and what they might call a supplement plan pretty much have about 100% coverage of that type of expense. But what we need to help folks know is that there's another care beyond the doctor care that we might need that Medicare will not address. And when that happens, that care can be rather expensive. So will the government step right in and pay? The answer is no. We must be down to a low asset level. And so that can be a real pressure brought onto the family. And as Doug said, it doesn't always happen slow. Sometimes it happens very rapidly.
Very rapidly.
I wanted to comment, if I could, on Nancy talking about the children paying for the premiums of parents, and maybe give you a story. I think it's a little cute. I don't know if you will, but anyhow, I received a call a couple of years ago from this businessman in another one of our towns here, and he said, my mother's in Florida, and he said, she's going to need help. And Ray, I don't want to provide that help, so I want to get her one of those long-term care plans so that when mom needs help, I don't have to go there and I don't want to provide that care. So being an insurance man, this was a good opportunity, so I worked with him and I worked with his mother, and we got her a plan. And I got to know the lady a little bit in communicating, and one day she said to me, what did my son say about him buying this plan for me? And of course I was very careful of what I said. She said, I bet he told you this. I want her to have that insurance because I don't want to take care of her. And she said, did he mention that? And I said, oh no, that never came up. But she said, Mr. Copenhaver, I want you to know, I don't want him providing my care either.
Well, parents have a very clear perspective about their children, as we all probably know as parents. We really do know our children and what their capacity is to be responsive as we age, which brings up another issue, and that is the whole issue of caregiving. And that is that in families, invariably there is one person that is responsible for having to take care of that individual. And I just wanted to get your perspective on the whole area of caregiving, since I read that many times the caregiver dies before the person they are attending to because of the stress.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, we see that without a doubt. And I think, you know, as much the services that we work with families is as much also for the caregiver as the person living with Alzheimer's, because they're the ones who are, especially people who are caring 24/7 in the home for someone. So knowing how to do all those things like bathing and feeding, I mean, they're doing that for their loved one. And so how can we help them? But and physicians in the area are definitely concerned about caregivers' health. And physicians that are really in touch know to be concerned about that and to be talking about that individual's health and how can they make sure that at some point, ultimately, that's why the long-term care decision is made. Because the health of the caregiver has declined so much that they are unable to care for that person in their, I mean, we experienced that in my family. And, you know, ultimately sometimes that caregiver has to, and it's extremely difficult. As was said, most people want to be able to care for someone in their home, but sometimes that does not become, that does not become possible.
I think also it's a gender issue. I mean, when you look at who are the caregivers, it's primarily women, spouse, adult daughter-in-law. So it's largely a female, gender issue that who are caregivers. I think the other thing that we are seeing is that it used to be that people didn't work as much. You had somebody at home always available to provide care. People clearly retired at a certain age. We don't have as many caregivers who are free as we once did. And so at the time when we probably have the greatest demand for caregivers, the supply of caregivers is probably at one of its lowest levels.
Michelle, I'd like to offer a legal perspective on caregiving too. We believe that the caregiver, if possible, ought to be paid, remunerated for her or his services. And so when we meet with families where there is already a caregiving relationship, caregiver, care receiver relationship established, we suggest that they have a personal services agreement between the two, where if mom is the one being cared for, she's actually paying daughter, and if she's living in daughter's home, for her services. That is a way to not only help the caregiver feel valuable in a tangible sense, but also to protect some of the money that may in the future also have to be spent down for nursing home care. And then we piggyback that personal services agreement with a lease. If mom is living in daughter's home, she ought to be paying rent. And so there are some tangible ways to take the stress off of the caregiver, so the caregiver isn't just giving and giving and giving. And then how fair is it at the end of mom's life when, if mom does have an estate, for that estate to be equally divided among all of the children and the caregiver to not get anything extra out of that. But that's often what happens when when a lease or a personal services agreement are not put into place.
That is very powerful, because I do feel a caregiver should be paid.
Yes.
Because in the marketplace, it's a compensable service.
Yes, yes.
And if mom is living there, now conversely, if a caregiver has to move in with mom, does mom charge her rent? Just asking. Is that how?
Well, we haven't had the reverse situation yet. We would
Okay,
have to think that through,
yeah.
but
Yeah. Just curious.
You may adjust the payment that you make to that caregiver.
Sure.
It's not
okay.
unlike if you had a live-in nanny, so to speak, for your kids.
Right.
You wouldn't charge the nanny rent per se,
Right. Got
but
it.
rather what you would do is you would adjust the compensation accordingly.
I think that's great.
Yeah,
I like that, because it does give them value. Because one
Yes.
of the things that I'm dealing with within my circle of friends is everybody is now having to deal with aspects of their parents aging. When you hit 80, things change. And people, and I'm telling all of you watching, it's the truth. Everything changes when they turn 80, because you move from senior to elder. And things just start changing. And I just feel there should be some kind of balance there.
Yes, yes.
And I know that under Medicaid guidelines, if a child actually moves into the home and is there for 2 years taking care of the parents, meaning they're domiciled there, then that asset is exempted out. And that's major. So I do tell people that it's not a very well understood or known clause, but if you do have to move in, change your domicility, live there, take care of your mother or dad or both, and at least that's an asset that could convey to you as a caregiver. But I feel what you're saying, because if a person dies and then the one child, and it's always one who has been faithful for whatever reasons, and then to talk about, well, I want to be equal, well, where's the equality with the other 2 or 3 or whatever? So I think that's great. What are your thoughts, Ray?
No two situations are ever the same, and the same way no family structures are the same. They're all different, and so we've heard stories, we've heard accounts of what has happened, but I so agree with you. There usually is a lead child in the family, and I don't know that that's all bad, because that's the person that usually is the one maybe interfacing with the attorney and mom and dad, and filling out, or taking that role of responsibility. Hopefully they would be also then communicating with their siblings. That doesn't always happen. It just is another thing that when long-term care need hits the family, there's a lot of unrest, and there's a lot of possible family feelings and mix-ups that you would rather not have. I wanted to comment one thing.
Okay.
80 might be when you're an elder, but things many times happen before age 80.
Oh, yes.
We've seen, especially with Alzheimer's, I don't know that there is a magic age when that might impact the family, when it may be much younger.
Well,
Is
over
it?
65, 1 in 8 are being diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
1 in 8 over 65.
And over 85, 1 in 2.
Ooh.
Wow.
So that's where that age, and that's why this whole baby boomer, it's
My goodness gracious.
I think the other thing that Ray
Okay.
hinted upon also is every situation is different. And regardless of your situation, you probably should, early as possible, seek the advice of a professional. You know, right now, the Medicaid period, if you're living with your parent, is 2 years. That can change.
Absolutely.
And, you know, the look-back
Absolutely.
period as to
Right.
Yes.
how long before you transfer assets constantly changes, getting farther and farther out. And that's where, you know, don't just talk to a professional once. You know, you
Yes.
may need to do follow-up and recheck your situation because nothing stays constant.
I totally agree with you. Now, from your perspective as executive director of a large multi-purpose agency, what type of counseling do you all provide? If a person calls you, their dad has had a stroke, the hospital says, you know, he's not responsive to rehab, and he's got to go. And usually it's like 24 hours. It's got to go. What do you do?
What do we do? Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, we get about 1,500 phone calls a month. We will also send out at no charge, and this is true pretty much across the state of Ohio, a nurse or a social worker who will meet with the consumer, their family, anybody who they want there, and really look at the situation, assess what are their needs, what can they do, and then provide options to them. And oftentimes, nursing home is not the only option. It's
Okay.
oftentimes the last resort, and people do need nursing home care. But the majority of folks, you can do a plan of care and kind of look at what are the resources of the family. Okay, you're an adult daughter, you have to work. Well, there's a daycare service that you can go to, whereas your parent or spouse could go to a daycare, home care services, emergency response systems, transportation. So we work with them to develop a package of care of services that would meet their needs.
And you do that at no charge?
At no cost.
That is amazing. That is absolutely amazing.
And if I could
Yes,
comment
go on
about it,
in.
if I could comment then on an insurance plan. So this family then touches base with Doug's office or a similar office. They begin to get counsel and advice and options. It's so wonderful then when the family knows that, let's say it's dad, that dad has a long-term care insurance policy, because that policy provides the money for home care or adult daycare or assisted living, as well as nursing. But the options are there. So maybe dad could be cared for just by some adult daycare occasionally, or bringing people into the home. He's not forced into the facility, and he's not because he had the wisdom to purchase a long-term care plan.
I think that's excellent. I think that's absolutely excellent advice. I think the mandate is upon us. And as I share with individuals, it does not matter how much you've accumulated in assets if you do not have long-term care, because you're going to be paying dollar for dollar for whatever care, whether you have a associate to come in to tend to your parents, or a nurse, or what. All these people cost money. These healthcare agencies cost money. And if your investable assets are being liquidated, particularly on your IRA money, that's taxable, really. And so here we are. I think we need to do a better job of telling people, you have to, it's not an option. I had a lady come in 2 weeks ago and went through all kinds of proposals with her. And she said, I'm just going to take my chances. A single woman, no children, had lots of real estate. And she said, I'm going to take my chances. And I said to her, you have car insurance.
Right.
And that is to cover risk. You have homeowners insurance, and that is to cover risk, the probability of which may not even occur. But yet you do it, but you don't want to do long-term care because you do not want to spend money to protect a predictable outcome. Am I correct?
Yes.
Is this kind of where we are today?
The current statistics by the Department of Aging suggests that 69% of Americans, before they die, will need some care beyond the doctor-type care. And that typically is what we call long-term care.
69%.
So 69% of us are going to be impacted, and they make that statistic after age 65. That appears to me to be something that I should insure. That's a large probability. What's interesting is of that 69%, 79% are females and 58% are male, because typically a woman will outlive a man by 6 years. And so if we need our care at the end of our life, but it's alarming that almost 7 out of 10 of us will need some type of care called long-term care.
So here's where we are, because time is moving along. Believe it or not, we have just scratched the surface, and yet our time is almost up. Yep. And so I would like for each one of you to look directly into your camera and just say in 1 minute what you would recommend to a family member who is facing this horrible situation. Just if you can imagine what you would just say quickly as the time wraps up. We'll start with you, Ray.
I think I would say to the family, it's important for the family to plan together. And should we not get together, talk about what we will do in the future as we reach an older age, and take that planning beyond just the financial needs. Certainly suggest to the family that we have our basic will and some of those instruments that Nancy probably will talk about, but also suppose we just need an extended amount of attention. How will we address that? How will we plan for that? Will we want the family members to have the responsibility, or would we like to have a wide array of choices? And so if I can help the family reach that conclusion, I'd like to have choices, I'd like to have options, then they'll see the wisdom of long-term care insurance.
And Attorney Roberson, quickly.
Well, I certainly want people to have the proper legal documents in place. We think in terms of a basic will, but that's just the foundation. Everyone needs to have a general durable power of attorney. I would add that Ohio law changed in March of this year, so if you already have a power of attorney, general power, it probably ought to be updated. Healthcare directives, the primary one of which is a healthcare power of attorney, a right of disposition of remains form that puts in place who's going to be in charge of your funeral and burial. So those are the basic legal documents that ought to be in place. But I want to piggyback on what Doug said about what his agency does. Don't try to do this alone. There are resources out there. There are social services resources who can help you coordinate services that you need. And so get that advice from the Area Agency on Aging and your lawyer, your physician, and so forth, and certainly the Alzheimer's Association.
Quickly, Carrie.
So with the Alzheimer's Association, really, it's just earlier is better. I think anyone who is suspecting dementia, please see a physician and ultimately try to connect with, if you're impacted by dementia and Alzheimer's, to contact the association, because we can help refer people to many resources and help them with the same type of decision-making process.
And Doug.
Call us. We can give you answers on aging. 1-800-258-7277, or locally 223-HELP. But call us. We're there to help, and we can link you up with the resources you need.
I would just like to say to everyone who has been privileged to be a part of our dialogue today on long-term care and aging, that you have been helped and that you have a broader perspective as to what we are facing today. It is a reality that just like you're born, at some point in your life, if you live long enough, you're going to experience aging and ultimately death. How you handle that part of your life, because you do have choices, will determine the outcome. And so I would like to encourage those of you that would like more information, please feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to refer you to any of my guests and hopefully begin to enable you and empower you to make the sound financial decisions for you and your family in the days ahead. I'm your host, Michelle Graves, of The Power of Money, thanking you so much for being a part of my world today. God bless you.
That's a wrap.